At 11:47 at night, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter, and the sound of it vibrating against the laminate felt louder than anything else in the room. I remember the way the overhead light cast a pale ring across the floor. I had been rinsing a mug when I saw my sister's name glowing through the dimness. I answered without thinking, the way you answer someone you have spent a lifetime rescuing. The first words out of her mouth were a laugh, bright and breathless, the kind that usually meant she had done something reckless and expected me to clean it up. Then she said it. I drained your $87,400. All of it. Her voice came through steady, almost proud, as if she had just crossed something off a to-do list. I stood there, with water dripping from my fingers onto the floor as she added that. I should feel honored because my money finally had a purpose. She was talking about her wedding in the morning, her perfect boon ceremony, with the mountain view and the white roses and the catered dinner she had bragged about for months. For a moment, I did not breathe. The clock on the microwave blinked its green numbers, and I stared at it as if it could explain why none of this shocked me. I did not yell. I did not cry. I only felt something inside me step backward, like my heart was pulling away from the rest of me to avoid taking the hit. Before I go any further, let me pause the memory for a second. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes the world feel smaller in a strangely comforting way. So when you get a chance, later feel free to share it in the comments. When all of this happened, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen with the dishwasher, humming behind me, and the night outside completely still. When I finally moved my hand enough to unlock the banking app, the screen glared up at me with a balance that made my stomach hollow out. Every transfer and withdrawal was listed in a neat column. Charge from boutiques I had never heard of. Payment to vendors that matched the notes she'd scribbled in her wedding planner. A large cash withdrawal. Then another. There was no hesitation in the pattern. No attempt to disguise what she had done. She had gone through everything I had saved from years of staying late at the office. Years of telling myself it was smart to have a safety net. I scrolled through the transactions until my thumb hurt. I could still hear her laughter ringing in my ears long after she hung up on me. She did not wait for a reaction. She assumed I would do what I always did. Absorb the blow. Quietly fix everything. Pretend it never happened. But I stood there in the kitchen, and something shifted. It was small at first, the way a door unsticks after being jammed for too long. I pressed the hotline number on the back of my debit card and listened to the on-hold music while staring at the cabinets I had painted earlier that year. The representative answered, and I heard myself explaining the situation in a voice so calm it startled me. I reported the unauthorized transfers and requested an immediate freeze. She asked a series of verification questions, her tone tightening as she scrolled through the same list of transactions I had just seen. Then she confirmed the account was locked. I thanked her and hung up. The apartment felt different now. Still quiet, still dim, but it felt like the walls had shifted an inch farther apart. I opened my laptop and pulled up the vendor contract. My sister had always wanted a mountain wedding, and she had put deposits down on everything from the ceremony platform to the cocktail hour jazz trio. All of it was bought on the assumption that I would be the one to save her from herself if anything went wrong. I started calling each vendor one by one. The florist first, then the venue, then the caterer. I explained that due to fraud on my account, the payments were invalid and requested cancellations. Some were understanding, some annoyed, some confused about why the bride herself was not the one calling. I did not offer explanations. I simply canceled, documented the confirmations, and moved on to the next call. Between calls, I could feel my pulse settling into something steady. Not calm exactly, but certain. There are moments in life when betrayal does not come as a shock. It arrives as proof of something you have known for too long, but refused to name. That was what I felt that night. Not heartbreak, not anger. Recognition, as if she had finally said out loud what her actions had been saying for years. I checked the time again. The green numbers blinked their way toward midnight. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I imagined the wedding guests who had already driven into town. The string lights hung over the outdoor patio, the boxes of decorations my sister had ordered online, all of it leaning on the assumption that I would keep her fantasy intact. And yet the only thing I felt was a deep, anchored certainty. There was no part of me that wanted to reverse what she had done. By the time I made the final cancellation call and logged out of my accounts, even from Apple wallets, the digital clock on the stove flipped to a new day, the wedding day. I stood there, letting the weight of that settle in. She had taken everything from my savings because she believed she could, because she believed I was too soft to make her face what she had done. But as the minute shifted forward, something in me shifted with it. I did not feel weak. I did not feel trapped. I felt done. I looked at the blank screen of my phone while the night pressed against the kitchen windows. I knew she would call again soon, probably over and over until her voice cracked from panic. But I also knew something she did not. The wedding she had built on stolen money, on entitlement, on the belief that I existed to rescue her, was not going to happen. Not in any form. I took one slow breath, set my phone face down on the counter, and turned off the kitchen light. The darkness settled around me in a way that did not feel frightening, but clarifying, as if the truth had been waiting for me to acknowledge it. I walked toward my bedroom with the quiet knowledge that nothing would unfold that way she expected. Not now. Not ever again. I slept for a few hours, the kind of shallow sleep that feels more like drifting in and out of a dim hallway than actually resting. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was pale with early light. For a brief second, I forgot everything. Then the memory of her laughter the night before slid back into place, and I felt the same quiet certainty settle in my chest. I made my way to the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and stood there, listening to the familiar clicks and hisses as it warmed. The smell of the grounds rose slowly, filling the silence. Then my phone began to buzz. At first, it was just one vibration, then another, then a steady rhythm. Text message notifications stacked across the screen faster than I could read them. I let them come, the same way you let rain hit a window. I poured myself a mug and held it between both hands. The steam curled upward, and I waited for my pulse to match the slow rising warmth. When I finally looked at the screen, I saw the first message from the venue. Payment invalid. Reservation canceled. The next one from the florist. Order voided. Then from the caterer. Service withdrawn. Each message arrived with the same crisp finality. It was strange how clean the lines looked against the chaos they were delivering. My kitchen was quiet. Miles away, her wedding morning was breaking apart piece by piece. The phone rang again. It was her. I let it go silent. Then it rang again. I turned it face down on the table. I did not need to hear her voice to know she was panicking. I could imagine exactly what was happening. Her hair is half done. Her makeup artist whispered in the other room. The bridal party arrived with coffee trays and garment bags, someone making a joke to ease the tension. Then the calls started. Then the texts. Vendors refusing to show. No food being prepared. No music booked. The venue refused to unlock the doors because the deposit had bounced, all of it unraveling at the speed of her entitlement. Another text came in from a cousin who had already driven into Boone. She asked if I knew anything because people were standing outside the venue, confused, and the coordinator was saying the wedding was not on the schedule anymore. I stared at that message for a long moment. It was odd to see the truth surface so quickly. She had built her entire image on being in control, being admired, being the girl who always landed on her feet. But without my financial safety net beneath her, she had nothing to stand on. The phone rang again. Still her. I turned down the volume. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness of it anchored me. The morning sun was beginning to slide across the countertop, and the hum of traffic from outside drifted in through the thin apartment walls. For a moment, everything around me felt almost peaceful. Then there was a sudden pounding on my door. It was fast, sharp, the kind of knocking that carries panic inside it. I knew it was her before she even spoke. I set my mug down and walked to the door. But I did not open it. I stood there listening to the sound of her breathing through the wood. She called my name over and over in a voice I barely recognized. Then she said she knew I was inside and begged me to open up. There was something wild in her tone, something that wanted to claw its way into my space, as if sharing my air could fix what she had broken. I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see her. She was standing in the hallway in her wedding dress. The lace hem darkened from where it had dragged across the parking lot. Her mascara had run down her cheeks, and her hair, once curled and pinned, had fallen into loose pieces. She looked nothing like the bride she had imagined herself to be. She reached for me, but I stayed where I was, my hand braced against the edge of the door. She asked why I would do this to her. She asked how I could be so cruel. She said she was humiliated and that our family was already demanding answers. I watched her talk with her hands pressed to her stomach as if she were trying to hold herself together. Her voice cracked and she began to cry in that same high-pitched panic she used to. Pull me into fixing things. But that pull was gone. Whatever line had tethered me to her for years had finally snapped. I told her the truth in 4 words. You stole from me. She froze. Her crying stopped mid-breath. For the first time since she arrived, she seemed to actually see me, not as her sister who would absorb the damage, but as someone who had reached the point she never believed I would reach. She shook her head and said none of it mattered because a wedding was happening today, and she needed me to fix everything. Right now. She said it as if it were a simple errand, something I could handle between breakfast and lunch. When she realized I was not moving, her voice rose again. She said I owed her. She said the family takes care of each other. She said the money had been sitting there doing nothing anyway. I told her again that she stole from me. Her face twisted into anger, not regret, not remorse, just anger that her version of me no longer existed. She stepped closer, and I stepped back. The hallway lights flickered above us. She accused me of ruining her life. She said people were already at the venue. She said her daughter was with a babysitter waiting to be dropped off later. She said the photographer was threatening to charge a penalty. She kept listing all the ways the day was falling apart. But none of those problems belonged to me anymore. She started pounding on the doorframe when it became clear I would not budge. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mom. The message preview flashed across the screen. Your sister is saying you ruined her wedding. Call me now. A moment later, she called. I answered, because ignoring her would only make things worse. As soon as I said hello, she began yelling. She asked what was wrong with me. She asked how I could embarrass the family like this. She said my sister was a single mother, and today was supposed to be the beginning of her new life. She said the entire mess was on my shoulders, and that I needed to go fix it. Immediately, her voice was sharp and unyielding, the same tone she had used all through our childhood whenever she wanted me to fall. In line. I listened in silence until she was done. Then I told her I did not owe anyone anything today. There was a pause on the line. Not long, but long enough for the weight of what I had said to settle in both directions. She told me she was disappointed in me. I said I understood and hung up. I stood there for a moment, looking at the closed door with my sister on the other side, and my mom's voice still ringing in my ear. I opened the door once more and told my sister she needed to leave. I told her I was not the solution she had counted on. Her face crumpled again, anger and disbelief mixing into something almost childlike. She whispered that she could not walk back out to her car looking like that with everyone waiting for her. I told her she would figure it out. She always had before, with or without me. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she stepped back, straightened her dress as best she could, and walked down the hallway. The train of her gown dragged behind her with a faint scraping sound. When she turned the corner and disappeared, the hallway felt bigger than I remembered. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and the air seemed to settle into something still and heavy. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. In the quiet that followed, I heard the distant slam of a car door and the muffled sound of an engine starting. Then nothing, just silence stretching across the apartment like a soft sheet. I did not know what would happen next. I only knew that the version of me she had relied on for her entire life was gone. And as I walked back to the kitchen to finish my now lukewarm coffee, I understood that keeping the door shut had been the first real choice I had made for myself in a very long time. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I leaned on the counter for a moment, letting the silence spread, and I realized I was not shaken the way I once would have been. Instead, there was a strange clarity filling the space where panic used to live. I stood there, breathing it in, until another thought rose to the surface, a thought I had not allowed myself to touch in years. This was not the first time I had been expected to clean up a mess that was never mine to begin with. This was only the first time I refused. That realization carried me back, whether I wanted it to or not. It always starts with one small thread, and then the whole memory pulls loose. I walked to the table, sat down, and let myself remember. Not the dramatic parts, not the shouting or the phone calls, but the quieter things. The early lessons, the ones that build themselves into the bones before you are old enough to know what is happening. Growing up in our house in Raleigh, my sister was always the fragile one, the delicate one, the one who needed to be shielded. It did not matter what the situation was, she always seemed to wilt at the slightest breeze, and everyone around her rushed to hold her upright. If she cried, the world stopped. If she pouted, the rules bent. If she struggled, someone else did the work for her. It was simply the way things were arranged, and no one questioned it. And then there was me, the older one, the steady one, the reliable one, the sister who understood. That word was used like a badge of honor in my childhood, and I wore it without realizing how heavy it was. I cannot count the number of times my mom looked at me and said that same line. You are the older sister. You need to understand. It came up in everything. If she broke something and blamed it on nerves, I needed to understand. If she got scared and refused to sleep alone, I needed to understand. If she threw a tantrum because she did not get her way, I needed to understand and give in. Understanding was always my responsibility, never hers. As a kid, I did not question any of this. Children do not analyze fairness. They adapt. They mold themselves around the rules without even realizing what they are doing. I grew into that role the way some children grow into handing me down shoes that are too tight but forced upon them anyway. After a while, you stop noticing the pinch. You think the discomfort is part of your personality. My dad was a quiet man, a man who loved peace more than he loved being right. He rarely challenged my mom. He rarely challenged anything. He would sit at the kitchen table reading the newspaper while my sister cried about something small, and my mom rushed to comfort her. He would nod at me occasionally, a tired sort of nod, as if thanking me for being the child who did not demand all his energy. He did not say it aloud, but I learned early that his silence was approval, or at least permission. Permission for the way things always leaned. There were moments, though, little cracks in the pattern, times when something in me tugged against the role I was given. I remember one afternoon when I was 12. My sister had broken the backyard gate by slamming it too hard and ran inside, crying that it was loose and she was scared it might fall on her. My mom immediately called my dad at work, insisting he come home because our house was unsafe. I stepped outside to look at it myself. It was not broken at all, just a loose hinge. I found a screwdriver in the shed and tightened it. It took less than 5 minutes. When my dad arrived home in a rush, sweating in his work uniform, he stared at the perfectly fixed gate and then at me. I told him calmly that it had only needed a screw. He nodded, patted my shoulder once, relieved, and went inside to comfort my sister. I stood there in the yard feeling something unfamiliar. Pride, maybe, or something closer to resentment. It was the first time I noticed how easily things could be solved if someone simply allowed me to try. But no one asked me to try. They only asked me to understand. These moments blended together through the years until the pattern was so predictable, it became invisible. I was the one who stayed late at school to help teachers clean up projects. I was the one who watched my sister's daughter anytime she needed a break. I was the one who covered bills when someone forgot a due date. There was always a reason, always a crisis, always a gentle reminder that I was the dependable one, the one who did not make things harder, the one who held everything up so no one else had to. What I never realized until adulthood was that being the strong one is often less a compliment and more a convenient way for others to avoid being responsible. No one checks on the strong one. No one questions them or wonders if they are tired or scared or overwhelmed. They are simply expected to absorb the extra weight. When people notice your strength, they assume it is endless. And when they discover, it is not they blame you for collapsing. The memory that rose next was one I tried to forget for a long time. I was 22, working my first real job, earning barely enough to cover my bills. My mom called one evening, saying the car needed new brakes and she did not have the money until her next paycheck. My sister could not help because things were tough and she had a toddler by then. Everyone looked toward me, the one with a job, the one who understood. I had never paid for anything that large before, but I went to the auto shop after work and handed over my debit card. It was nearly $300, which may not sound like much now, but at that time it was almost all I had left after rent. I remember standing outside afterward under the flickering streetlight, holding the receipt. I felt proud at first. I had done something adult, something helpful, but that feeling did not last. Because no one asked if it had been hard for me. No one even paused long enough to wonder if that money mattered. They simply thanked me casually and moved on, already certain that I would step up again the next time they needed something. That was the moment that began the slow burnout inside me. Not because of the money, but because of the assumption. The assumption that my role was fixed, that my identity was locked in. Strong, reliable, understanding. There was no room in that script for me to say no or even to hesitate. If I dared to push back, someone would remind me softly or sharply, depending on their mood. You are the older sister. You need to understand. Standing at my kitchen table that morning after the wedding disaster, I traced that line back through the years. Every time they said it, every time I accepted it, every time it settled deeper in my chest. I realized that even now, after everything that had happened, part of me still felt the old reflex twitch. The reflex that said, maybe I should answer her calls. Maybe I should calm her down. Maybe I should try to reassure my mom or smooth things over with the extended family. Not because I wanted to, but because that was who I had always been expected to be. But that expectation no longer fits. It did not fit for a long time. It was like wearing an old coat that never kept me warm, but stayed on my shoulders, simply because everyone else insisted it looked good on me. I stared at the table, the grain of the wood catching the morning light, and let myself sit with that truth. I had been trained to play a part, and I had played it so well that no one imagined I could exist outside of it. Least of all, me. That was when another memory surfaced. Not dramatic, just ordinary. A Saturday morning a few years back when my mom called and asked if I could pick up groceries because she was tired and my sister was having a rough week. I went without thinking, filled a cart with everything she listed, paid with my own money again, packed it into her pantry, and drove home feeling an ache I could not name. Later that day, a neighbor posted on social media complimenting my mom for being so thoughtful and always keeping a well-stocked kitchen. My mom replied with a comment about how she always took pride in feeding her family. My sister chimed in saying we were all lucky to have her. No one mentioned me, and I did not expect them to. That was the saddest part. I had become invisible even to myself. As I sat in my apartment remembering all of this, I felt something shift again. Small, but unmistakable. For the first time, I saw the full shape of the role I had been cast in. Not a villain, not a victim, just a placeholder. Someone who filled in the gaps so others did not have to acknowledge them. Someone who understood. I pressed my palms together on the table and let that truth settle. My sister had not stolen $87,400 from someone strong. She had stolen it from someone she believed would never fight back. Someone trained her whole life to prioritize keeping the peace over protecting herself. She counted on the script repeating itself. That morning, I realized I no longer wanted that script. I no longer wanted to be the understanding one. I no longer wanted to carry what everyone else refused to hold. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet. The sunlight was climbing higher across the kitchen floor. I breathed in slowly and let out a breath that felt heavier than the ones before it. I knew exactly what my role had been in that family and why they needed me to stay in it. It kept them from facing themselves. By the time I stood up from the table, I understood something with absolute clarity. The role of the older sister had been written for me, so they would never have to change. And once I stopped playing it, everything they relied on would fall apart. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, people moving through their own lives, unaware of the unraveling happening inside me. I felt strangely calm. For the first time since childhood, I felt the possibility of stepping out of that role entirely. I turned away from the window, knowing the consequences of that shift would come soon enough. And I knew I would not back down when they did. But the moment I tried to steady myself, another wave of memory rose, sharp and insistent, and it carried me straight into the part of the story I had avoided examining for years. My sister did not only lean on me because I was the older one, she leaned on me because she had found the perfect way to make sure I never said no. She used her daughter, my niece, without hesitation and without shame, as the soft spot she knew I could never armor over. It started subtly, a text here and there when her daughter had a cold, a call asking if I could pick up medicine because she could not leave the house. I always went because I adored that little girl from the moment she was born. Holding her tiny body against my chest in the hospital felt like being handed something worth protecting. My sister knew that. She studied it the way someone studies the weak hinges on a door they plan to push open. She knew that all she had to do was mention her daughter, and I would move before I even paused long enough to ask questions. I remember one night in particular. It was around 11 in the evening. I had just settled into bed when my phone buzzed. My sister sent a message saying her daughter had a fever and she had no money for an urgent care visit. She said she was scared, that the child was crying, that she did not know what to do. Without hesitation, I got dressed, grabbed my wallet, and drove across town. Her daughter was half asleep when I arrived, cheeks flushed, small body warm against my shoulder as I carried her to the car. My sister rode in the front seat, scrolling through her phone, as if she were bored. I paid for the visit, the medicine, and bought snacks afterward, because her daughter said she was hungry. My sister thanked me once in a flat voice. Later that week, she posted online about how hard it was being a single mother, how she handled everything on her own, how proud she was of herself for staying strong through the long night at urgent care. Not a single mention of me, not even privately. When I looked at the photos she posted, I saw her posing beside a shopping bag from an expensive boutique. She had bought it the next morning. Another time, her daughter needed new shoes because she had outgrown the old ones. That is what my sister told me. She asked if I could pick them up since she was too busy with work. She said she would pay me back. I bought them, dropped them off at her apartment, and left quickly because I had somewhere else to be. Later, I found out she had taken her daughter to a birthday party that same afternoon wearing a brand new outfit she bought with the money she claimed she did not have. The shoes I bought were tossed in the corner of the living room with the tags still on them. Her daughter had never even tried them on. Moments like these accumulated, the way pollen sticks to clothing in spring. Light enough to ignore at first, then suddenly you look down and realize you've been carrying far more than you thought. Every time I paid for something her daughter needed, she would tell me she was grateful, and that one day she would pay me back. But when she told the story to others, she always made herself the hero. She gave herself credit for the stability I provided. She claimed the role of the sacrificed mother, the unstoppable, the resilient. People believed her because she played the part well. She had mastered the tone, the expression, the tilt of the head that said life was hard, but she was somehow rising above it. They praised her for being strong, resourceful, and devoted. They praised her for being a mother who did everything she could. No one praised me. But that was not what hurt. What hurt was realizing that her version of the story made me unnecessary. I began to notice a pattern. She never reached out unless she needed something. The calls were never simply to ask how I was. The messages never came unless there was a crisis or a bill or a deadline she needed me to step into. On the rare days when I asked for space or said I was busy, she would remind me that her daughter needed stability, and that I was one of the only people she trusted. It sounded like a compliment, until I saw the truth behind it. She trusted me because she knew I would not say no. She trusted me because she knew I would always put her daughter first. She trusted me because she had found a way to frame her requests as acts of love, instead of burdens. There was one birthday that still sits heavy in my memory. Her daughter was turning 6. My sister called a week before the party, saying she did not have money for decorations, a cake, or presents. She sounded frantic. She said she did not want her daughter to feel less than the other kids. She did not want to disappoint her. She asked if I could cover the party and maybe bring a few extra things to make it special. I told her I would do what I could. I ended up buying the cake, the decorations, the gifts, and paying for the little venue she had chosen. I spent hours decorating the room with pink streamers and balloons, arranging gift bags, and helping set up tables. When the guests arrived, my sister greeted them with a bright smile and said she had been planning the party for weeks. Everyone complimented her. She accepted those compliments with ease. When I handed her daughter a gift, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you," in my ear. That was the only acknowledgement I needed. But later that night, after everyone left, my sister sat on the couch scrolling through her phone and told me quietly that next year, she hoped I could do even more because she wanted the party to look more polished. She said this without irony or awareness of how deeply exhausted I was. I should have recognized the pattern then. I should have realized that she had turned motherhood into a shield, a backdrop she stood in front of whenever she needed financial support or emotional validation. She was not malicious. She was practicing. She knew exactly how to shape a narrative that earned sympathy, praise, and excuses. She knew that being a single mother drew empathy from everyone around her. She knew that being seen as strong while struggling made people soften toward her. She leaned into that identity so fully that she forgot to be honest. Or she never intended to be honest at all. The worst part came later, when I discovered she had been using the money I gave her not for her daughter, but for maintaining a lifestyle she wanted to present to others. She bought expensive dresses and handbags, took weekend trips with friends, treated herself to spa appointments, all while telling me her daughter needed new clothes or medicine or supplies for school. She knew I would not question it. She knew I would rush in with whatever was needed because I did not want the little girl to suffer for the decisions of the adults around her. Looking back, the shift in my understanding did not come from anger. It came from something quieter, a kind of fatigue that settled in my bones after years of carrying responsibilities that were never mine. When I realized my sister had used her daughter's needs as leverage to access my wallet, my time, and my guilt, the exhaustion grew heavier. Not because of the money I spent, but because of the way she used the love I had for me, her child, to manipulate me. Love is supposed to be a gift, not a trap. Yet somehow, she had found a way to make it both. One evening last year, I remember sitting in my car outside a pharmacy after buying yet another round of medicine, this time an inhaler she said her daughter desperately needed. I looked at the receipt and felt a strange hollowness I could not name. I was not angry with my niece. I was not angry with my sister. I was tired. It was a tiredness that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was the tiredness of someone who had been carrying far too much for far too long, and could finally see that the load had never been shared. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and realized I could not keep doing this. But even then, I did not say anything. I drove the medicine to her apartment, handed it to her, and hugged my niece goodnight. That is what happens when you let a role define you. You forget you can step out of it. You forget you have a choice. I had forgotten that for years. As all these memories rose in my mind on that morning after the failed wedding, I did not feel righteous. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel proud of having finally said no. I only felt the weight of years of misplaced loyalty pressing against me, not crushing me, but reminding me of all the times I'd bent myself into shapes that did not belong to me. Standing in my kitchen, I finally admitted something I should have understood long ago. My sister had never valued my support. She had always valued my usefulness. And that is a very different thing. She used motherhood as a performance, and she used my love for her daughter as the stage lighting that made the performance believable. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt spent. Completely, utterly spent. My body felt heavy, my breath slow. My thoughts drained of their usual resistance. I sat down at the table again and let my shoulders sag. It was the first time in years that I allowed myself to feel how tired I truly was. And somewhere in that exhaustion, in that quiet surrender to the truth, I understood with clarity that nothing she had taken from me hurt as much as the way she had taken advantage of my heart. My niece had become the doorway she walked through whenever she wanted access to my life. And I had left that doorway wide open. I did not know what the next few days would look like or how far the fallout from the ruined wedding would reach. But in that moment, one thing became certain. I could not keep being the person she expected me to be. I could not keep giving pieces of myself away because she framed every request as love, as responsibility, as duty. I could feel a new boundary forming inside me. Slow but solid, rising with every breath I took. I rested my forehead on my hands and let the quiet settle around me. I was not angry. I was simply done. That was the thought that sat heavy in my chest as I finally lifted my head and looked toward my laptop on the other end of the table. Something inside me shifted again, not with heat or fury, but with a steady sense of purpose, the kind that comes after a long stretch of being overlooked. I stood up slowly, walked to the cabinet where I kept old documents, and pulled down a box I had not opened in years. It was time to see everything clearly. Not the stories she told, not the versions my family accepted, but the truth that lived in numbers, dates, charges, and receipts. I carried the box to the table, set it down, and opened the lid. Inside were years of statements, invoices, printed confirmations, and folded notes I had saved for no reason other than habit. I pulled them out one stack at a time, spread them across the table, and sat down with a long exhale. My hands were steady. My breath was steady. Something about seeing the paperwork made all the emotional noise fall away. This was not about feelings now. This was about facts. I turned on my laptop, logged into my online banking, and began printing statement after statement. Each month appeared on the screen with a clinical precision that felt almost comforting. There was no spin, no narrative, no excuses, just the truth. I watched pages slide out of the printer and stack themselves at my elbow. Charge from Target, charges from children's clothing stores, charge from urgent care centers, charges from pharmacies, charges from grocery stores, and then, beneath all of that, the charges that never belonged to me in the first place. Designer boutiques, spa packages, hotel stays, beauty counters, online orders that totaled hundreds of dollars at a time, all of them nestled between the things she had told me were urgent for her daughter. It felt surreal at first, almost like looking at someone else's life. Then it became painfully familiar. I reached for a highlighter, uncapped it, and began marking the charges that matched the dates when she had told me her daughter was sick or needed something important. I went slowly, line by line, letting the neon ink cut through the stories she had fed me over the years. One date jumped out immediately. A $200 charge for a prescription my sister said she could not afford for her daughter. Standing right above it was a $500 charge from a downtown salon where she had gotten her hair colored and styled. She had sent me a picture that day, holding her daughter on her hip while showing off her new hair. I had complimented her. I had not questioned how she paid for it. I moved to the next month, a large urgent care fee for her daughter's breathing problems. Beneath it, 2 separate orders from a luxury shoe website. I kept highlighting. New outfits for her daughter's first day of school. A week later, she had bought herself a designer handbag. A birthday party she said she could not afford. Around that same time, she had taken a weekend trip to Asheville with friends, posting photos by the hotel pool and tagging the location proudly. It was all there. Every lie. Every manipulation, every moment she had pulled on my heart to justify draining my wallet. I kept going until the papers were covered in yellow stripes. The table looked like a map of everything I had never said out loud. Once the statements were sorted, I opened my phone. There were hundreds of messages from her saved in long threads. Some short, some are frantic, some sentimental. I scrolled back through years of texts until the oldest ones blurred in my vision. Then I began taking screenshots. Her pleas, her promises, her declarations that she would pay me back, her words about being a single mom barely holding on, her accusations when I took too long to respond, her sudden warmth when she needed something, her silence when she got it. I saved each screenshot in a folder on my desktop, labeled Timeline. It felt clinical, detached, almost like gathering evidence for an audit. I organized them by year, then by month, matching them to the statements and invoices scattered across the table. A quiet part of me questioned why I was doing this. I knew the truth already. I had lived it. So why document it so thoroughly now? The answer settled in slowly, because no one ever saw this. My family never saw it. Her fiancé never saw it. None of the friends who praised her for being such a resilient single mother saw it. I had not seen it clearly until now. The truth had been hidden in my silence. By keeping the peace, I had been keeping the lie alive. That realization struck me harder than I expected. I set the highlighter down and leaned back in my chair, my chest tightened. I had spent years believing I was doing the right thing by being quiet, by supporting her behind the scenes, by letting her take the praise. But all that silence had done was strengthen the story she built, the one where she was the selfless mother and I was nothing more than a convenient background figure. My silence had protected her. My silence had enabled her. My silence had erased me. I picked up another stack of papers and continued working, because stopping would mean acknowledging the ache forming behind my ribs. I printed photos from birthdays I had paid for. I printed receipts from stores she never reimbursed me for. I printed every invoice related to her daughter's medical visits that she had sworn she would pay back one day. I labeled them. I arranged them. I built the timeline brick by brick until the whole pattern was impossible to ignore. There was one message I found that made me pause. It was from 2 years earlier. She had texted saying her daughter needed a new jacket for winter, and she could not afford one. She said she wanted to keep her daughter warm and safe, and asked if I could help. I transferred the money immediately. Later that same evening, she posted photos from a dinner date with a man she was seeing then. They were sitting beside a fireplace at a nice restaurant. She was wearing new boots. The jacket I paid for was never mentioned. My throat tightened, and I had to stop for a moment. Not because of the money, but because of the realization that she had never truly seen me as family. She had seen me as a resource, someone reliable, someone predictable, someone who would not say no. Not because she valued me, but because she knew I valued her daughter. I kept printing. The noise of the printer filled the room in steady bursts. Page after page slid onto the growing stack. I highlighted the boutique purchases. I highlighted the spa treatments. I highlighted the hotel charges. All of them lined up against the moments she had stood in front of me with tears in, her eyes saying her daughter needed help. When I was done, the table was covered. A complete history. Not the version she told people. Not the version my family defended. The real version. The one I had carried quietly for far too long. I sat there looking at it all. The piles of paper, the highlighted lines, the screenshots stacked neatly on my desktop. And I felt something new. Not anger, not even sadness. A kind of clarity that hummed under my skin. The silence I had kept for years was no longer protecting anyone. It was only making me smaller. I pushed my chair back and walked to the kitchen to refill my water. When I returned, I opened my laptop again and created a new document. I began dropping everything into it. The evidence, the messages, the timeline, the receipts. I organized it with headers, dates, and explanations. Not emotional explanations. Factual ones. Clear, concise, undeniable. I worked for hours, barely looking up. The apartment around me shifted from morning light to afternoon glow. The shadows stretched across the floor, and the hum of the refrigerator became the background rhythm I worked to. I kept adding, refining, sorting, until the entire truth formed itself into something clean and unshakable. At one point, I paused and reread a section I had just finished. It was a screenshot of a message where she had said she would pay me back for the urgent care bill. Right above it was a screenshot of her bragging to a friend about buying herself an expensive bracelet the next day. The contrast was ridiculous, blinding. I stared at it and shook my head. If anyone else had done this to me, I would have walked away long ago. But because she was my sister, I had convinced myself there was no line she could cross. Now I could see she had crossed it years ago. I clicked save on the document and leaned back. The folder on my desktop was full. The evidence was complete. I had built the truth in a way even I could not deny now. For the first time since the wedding morning, the apartment felt quiet in a different way. Not empty, Not lonely. Clear, as if the noise that had lived inside me for years had finally settled into a shape I could understand. I opened a browser window and hovered my cursor over a social media tab. I imagined what would happen if I posted everything. The shock, the messages, the denials, the outrage, the unraveling of every lie she had told about who she was and what she endured. I imagined my family's reactions. My mom would blame me. My dad might go quiet. Her friends would scatter. Her fiancé might see the truth for the first time. My finger lingered over the trackpad. Everything was ready. All I had to do was click. But I did not. Not yet. I closed the window, left the document open behind it, and sat still for a moment. I was not hesitating. I was preparing. There was a difference. Before anything went public, I needed to understand exactly what story I was choosing to tell. Not the one she had written for me, not the one my family had protected, the real one. I turned off the printer, stood up slowly, and looked at the table one more time. The evidence waited in perfect silence. I knew what came next. I could feel it forming like a storm beyond the horizon, and I also knew I was no longer afraid of it. I sat back down, opened the laptop again, and positioned my hands on the keyboard, ready to step into the next moment. The truth was finally in front of me. All that remained was deciding what to do with it. For a long breath, I just stared at the folder on my screen, the one that now held years of reality no one besides me had ever bothered to see. Then, almost without thinking, I clicked it open again. The screenshots, the statements, the receipts, all arranged neatly in rows. But I knew there was still one more thing I needed to add before any of this was complete. The part of the story she always worked the hardest to hide. The part that showed who she really was, behind the image she spent so much time building in front of other people. I opened a new tab and logged into the credit monitoring service I used for work. I typed her full name and waited while the report loaded. I had seen pieces of it before, little glimpses when she begged me to co-sign something, or asked if I could put a bill in my name for a month or two. She always brushed it off with a soft laugh, saying credit was confusing and she was doing her best. I never pressed. Now I watched the numbers appear on the screen and felt a heaviness settle over me. Her credit score was low, not just low from a temporary setback, but low in the way that showed a long trail of unpaid bills, missed payments, accounts sent to collections, and a history of borrowing more than she ever intended to repay. I scrolled down, my eyes moving slowly through the list. There were medical bills and collections, a utility company that had closed an account for non-payment, a credit card that had been maxed out for over a year, personal loans taken in small amounts and never followed through, all of it hidden under the polished story she told the family of fiancé, the story where she was a hard-working, single mother pulling herself up through sheer will. She had told them she was independent. She told them she handled her own finances. She told them she never accepted handouts. And they believed her. They believed her because she wore the right dresses, spoke with the right softness, and posted carefully chosen pictures online that made her life look tidy and admirable, all while the truth lived in numbers that could not be glossed over. I printed the report. The machine hummed and fed the pages out one by one. Each page was another piece of the truth she had relied on me to cover up. It hit me suddenly that she did not just use my money to survive. She used it to maintain an image. She wanted to be seen as someone who deserved a certain lifestyle, someone who belonged beside a man with a stable family and high expectations. She wanted to be impressive, and she used me to fill the gaps between the person she pretended to be and the person she actually was. I placed the printed report beside the stack of receipts and statements on the table. The truth was becoming a wall, a structure that could finally hold itself up without me needing to support its weight with excuses. I turned back to my phone and searched through more messages, not the ones about her daughter this time, the ones she sent when she was short on rent or behind on car insurance or wanted to make a payment look current so she could qualify for something. I found them easily. They appeared in long threads with phrases that repeated themselves like a rhythm. I promise I will pay you back. It is just this once. I am turning things around. I will not ask again. But she always asked again, and again, And again. I screenshotted every one of those messages and added them to the timeline. They told a story without me needing to say a single extra word. The story of a woman who lived on borrowed money, borrowed sympathy, borrow identity. And the story of a sister who kept filling the debts because she believed she was doing the right thing. As I sorted the files and added the new pieces to the folder, an odd calm settled over me. Not the soft kind of calm that comes with comfort, but the rooted kind that appears when everything is finally laid bare. I realized I no longer felt the twisting guilt that always rose in me whenever I tried to stand up for myself. That guilt had been built by years of conditioning. Years of my mom telling me my sister needed more help than I did. Years of my sister telling me she had no one else. Years of being the person who understood. But looking at the evidence now, the truth felt clean, sharp, undeniable. It was impossible to argue with the numbers. They did not bend or soften. They did not behave like the emotions that swayed me for so long. They simply existed. I gathered all the printed pages into a binder and slid the screenshots into digital order on the screen. The timeline now showed everything. The luxuries she bought while telling me she could not afford groceries. The vacation she took while saying her daughter needed medicine. The unpaid bills she hid. The loans she asked me to cover. The clothes she bought to impress people she wanted approval from. The pattern was unmistakable. And the part that pierced me most was not the money, not the lies, not even the manipulation. It was the realization that the version of her I believed in had never really existed. She had crafted an identity and expected me to support it, quietly. And I had done that for so long that she genuinely believed she had earned them, admiration of others. I sat down in front of the laptop again. The binder sat beside me, thick and full. The folder on my computer glowed on the screen. I could feel something tightening inside me. Not anger now. Something more decisive. Something close to closure. I opened a blank post window on social media. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I looked at the empty space, waiting for words. The cursor blinked patiently. I imagined the fallout. I imagined the silence that would follow. I imagined my mom calling me, her voice filled with shock. I imagined my dad saying little, but processing everything slowly, as he always did. I imagined my sister reading the post with her hands shaking. I imagined the family seeing the truth behind the woman they thought they knew. I imagined the last mask she wore slipping off completely. I lifted my hands and began typing. Not a long explanation, not a dramatic speech, just a simple introduction and the truth in the form of screenshots and statements. The facts could speak for themselves. When I finished attaching each image and document, the post looked plain, almost dull. But I knew what it would do. The truth did not need to be dressed up. It only needed to be seen. I read it through once. Then I read it again. There were no personal insults, no emotional jabs, no unnecessary details. Only what happened. Exactly as it happened. And I felt strangely at peace. My silence had protected her for years. Now, the truth would protect me. My finger hovered over the button for a final moment. A long breath moved through me. Then I pressed it. For a long second, nothing happened. The screen did not flicker. No flood of comments appeared. The apartment did not shift. The world outside my window stayed exactly as it was. The only sound came from the low hum of my refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock above the hallway. I sat there, feeling my own heartbeat settle into something slow and steady. It was done. The truth was out there. And for the first time in years, I did not feel the instinctive panic to take it back. Then my phone vibrated. One vibration. Then 3. Then a continuous ripple across the table like a trapped insect desperate to escape. At first, I did not pick it up. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side of that screen. All the versions of her story that she had stitched together with charm and tears. We are beginning to loosen at the seams. I finally reached for the phone and flipped it over. The notifications stacked themselves faster than I could read them. Messages from people I had not spoken to in years. Missed calls. Alerts, and then, at the very top, my sister's name. Dozens of messages already. Then the call itself, her name flashing in bright white letters. I watched it ring without touching the phone. The ringtone filled the room. When it stopped, she called again. Her voice messages began appearing immediately. I tapped the first one, more out of morbid curiosity than concern. Her voice came through in a frantic rush. She demanded to know why I would lie about her. She said I was being cruel. She said I was jealous. She said I was exaggerating. I tapped the next one. She was crying now, begging, then angry again, then quiet, then furious. It sounded like she was pacing, her breath fast, as if she was trying to outrun the reality she had created. I set the phone aside and turned back to the desk. There was still one thing I had not posted. The recording. The call from 11:47 at night. I had saved it automatically without even meaning to. I had forgotten my phone's setting that backed up audio when a call ended abruptly. The file had been sitting there quietly, waiting. I had listened to it once, hours earlier, just to confirm it was clear. It was. Perfectly clear. Her voice was laughing. Her words are sharp and confident. Her confession unfiltered. I drained your $87,400. You should feel honored. Your money finally has a purpose. There was no context to soften it, no tone to misinterpret, no space for excuses. It was the truth exactly as it happened. The cursor blinked on the fresh post screen. I uploaded the recording. I added only a single line above it. No commentary, no anger, just a timestamp. 11:47 at night. I pressed a post. The ripple effect was immediate. Notifications shot across my screen like sparks. Comments from people who heard her laughter, people who heard the certainty in her voice, people who recognized entitlement when they heard it out loud. My phone vibrated again and again, buzzing against the wood like a heartbeat gone wild. I did not respond to any of it. I simply watched as the truth began to move through the world without me having to push it. Then my phone rang again, but this time, it was not her. It was her fiancé. The name surprised me enough that I hesitated before answering. I let it ring once more, then pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. His voice was steady at first, too steady, like a man trying very hard to hold on to whatever part of reality had not crumbled yet. He asked if he could speak freely. I said yes. That was all I said. He took a breath deep enough that I could hear the strain in it. Then he asked if everything he had seen was real, not exaggerated, not taken out of context. Real. I did not embellish. I did not soften. I answered simply, "It is all real." There was silence on the line. Long enough that I almost wondered if he had hung up. Then he whispered something I could barely hear. I thought she was different. I thought she was honest. I thought she carried herself with dignity. I did not respond. That was not mine to carry. He asked one final question, one that hit me harder than I expected. How long has this been happening? I felt the weight of years in my chest. I told him the truth. A long time. Longer than you think. He did not speak again. After a few seconds, the line clicked and the call ended. I set the phone back on the table. My hands did not tremble. My breath did not shake. I felt nothing but a slow, deep exhale working its way through me. Within minutes, the messages from my sister changed. The accusations softened into pleading. She said she was losing everything. She said I did not understand the pressure she was under. She said her fiancé was furious and she did not know what to do. She said her daughter was watching her cry and asking what was wrong. Then she said it was my fault for posting the truth. She blamed me for exposing it, instead of blaming herself for creating it. Her panic spilled through every word. But nothing in her messages said, "I am sorry." Nothing in them acknowledged the harm she had done. She only mourned the collapse of her narrative. It struck me then how fragile her story had always been. One recording, one moment of honesty. That was all it took to unravel years of curated image. She had built her identity on a sacrifice she never made. She had built her reputation on hardship she never shouldered. She had built her entire life on the illusion of being a single mother doing everything alone. And that illusion shattered the moment people heard her true voice. As the notifications kept coming, The phone buzzed so hard it vibrated itself halfway across the table. I picked it up, turned it to silent, and set it face down. Then I reached for the lamp beside me and turned it off. The room dimmed until only the soft light from the street outside filtered through the curtains. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not offer explanations. I did not clarify anything. I turned the phone completely off and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Let the truth speak on its own. Let the fallout happen without me feeding it. Let the people involved sit with the reality they had avoided for years. I crawled under the blanket, closed my eyes, and let the silence return. For the first time in a long time, I slept. I slept deeper than I had in years. And when I opened my eyes the next morning, a strange stillness settled over me. Not peace exactly, but an absence of weight. My phone was still in the drawer beside my bed, turned off, blissfully quiet. I let it stay there. Whatever storm was waiting on the other side of that screen could wait a little longer. I took my time moving through the morning. I brewed coffee. I opened the blinds. I let sunlight spill across the kitchen counters. My body felt lighter somehow, like I had been holding myself rigid for so long that release felt foreign. Eventually, I turned my phone back on. It lit up instantly with a cascade of vibration, one alert after another, so many that the screen froze for a moment before catching up. I set it on the table and stepped back, letting it sort itself out. When the buzzing finally quieted, I sat down and scrolled. I did not have to search for updates. They found me. Messages poured in from people who had known my sister for years. Neighbors, former co-workers, old classmates, women she had met through mom groups, friends she had made through her fiancé's family. They were stunned by what they heard in the recording. Some apologized to me for ever believing the narrative she built. Some admitted they had always sensed something off, but could never put words to it. A few were angry. Not at me, but at her for selling them a story that had never been real. What struck me most was how fast the shift came. It did not matter how carefully she had crafted her image, or how long she had held it together with charm and excuses. Once the truth surfaced, that image no longer held. Her stories stopped working. I clicked through social media where the fallout had already begun. Her friends were posting vague messages about betrayal. Some unfollowed her publicly. A few removed photos of her from past gatherings. People whispered and commented, piecing together what I had revealed with their own scattered memories of suspicious behavior. The version of her they had admired was slipping through their fingers. Then came the message from her fiancé, asking if he could speak to me in person. He did not sound angry in the text, just resolute. I agreed to meet him in the afternoon at a coffee shop near downtown Boone. The drive there felt strange. Calm. I did not rehearse what I would say. I did not brace for conflict. I simply arrived, walked in, and found him seated at a small table near the window. He looked exhausted. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had spent the night discovering parts of his life that were not real. He stood when he saw me and nodded quietly. We sat down. He did not waste time. He told me he had read everything. He said he had listened to the recording 15 times. He said he had matched the dates on the receipts I posted with things my sister had told him over the years. He said that every answer he sought led to the same truth. She lied. Not once, not in desperation, but consistently, systematically. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them. He said he had believed she was building a stable future for them. He believed she was careful with money. He believed she was honest about her struggles. He believed she was strong. He believed she was sincere. The words started to crumble as he spoke them. His voice tightened. Then he said the sentence I will never forget him speaking aloud. I thought I loved a woman who existed. Now I am realizing she never did. He told me he was ending the engagement. Not because of pride, not because of embarrassment, but because trust is the foundation of a marriage, and she had burned through every corner of it. He said he could forgive hardship. He could forgive mistakes. But he could not build a life with someone who used deceit as her default. When he stood to leave, he thanked me, not for exposing her, but for showing him the truth before he tied his life to someone who would have, eventually, broken him. I nodded silently. He walked out of the cafe without looking back. Through the window, I watched him cross the street and disappear behind a row of parked cars. I did not feel satisfied. I did not feel vindication. I simply felt the final weight of a door closing. Later, that dad called. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He asked if we could talk. His voice carried a heaviness I was not used to hearing from him. David had always stayed quiet during conflict. For years, I assumed this was passivity. Now I wondered if it was fear, or a habit, or exhaustion. I told him he could come by if he wanted. He said he would. When he arrived, he stood inside my doorway for a long moment, as if adjusting to a different version of me. He looked around my apartment, lingered on the table where the stacks of papers had been the previous day, then sat down slowly. He said he had read the posts. He said he had listened to the recording. He said he did not know how deep everything ran. He admitted he had believed my sister when she said she was struggling. He admitted he never questioned how she kept up with the image she presented. Then he asked me why I had never said anything. That question nearly unbalanced me. I told him the truth, because I did not think anyone would listen. Because every time I tried to say something small, it got smoothed over by my mom. Because being the older sister meant being silent. Because being silent kept the peace. Because keeping the peace was easier for everyone but me. David bowed his head and rubbed the back of his neck. He said he had failed me without realizing it. He said he had assumed I was fine because I never complained. He said he did not notice how much I carried because I carried it quietly. There was no defensiveness in his voice. Only regret. Then he told me something that made my chest tighten. He said he was ashamed of himself for allowing a story to define our family that should never have existed. When he left, he hugged me. It was brief, but it held sincerity I had not felt from him in years. That night, my mom called. Unlike my dad, she was frantic. She demanded to know why I would air the family's private issues. She insisted I was exaggerating. She said my sister was fragile. She said I had humiliated them. She said I needed to fix it immediately. Her voice was sharp, accusing, trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. I listened, letting her words fall through me. When she finally stopped, breathing hard, I told her gently but firmly that I was done taking responsibility for things I did, not cause. I said the truth was the truth. I said I would not take anything down. She went silent. Then she hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time after the call ended. The quiet felt different now. Not like something missing, but like something restored. Over the next few days, the consequences unfolded on their own. I did not intervene. I did not fuel them. I simply watched as the story my sister built collapsed under its own weight. Friends stopped answering her calls. Neighbors avoided her. People who had once spoken about her with admiration no longer knew what to say. Even the mothers she had connected with through her daughter's school stepped back, uncomfortable with being associated with deception. The fallout was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was not vindictive. It was quiet, steady, like snow melting from a roof. People withdrew not because they wanted to punish her, but because they no longer trusted her. The thing she valued most, her image, dissolved beneath her feet. The most striking shift came from my dad. He stopped defending her. He stopped excusing her. He stopped smoothing things over. His silence changed shape. It was no longer passive. It was reflective. He was finally seeing the family dynamics clearly, perhaps for the first time. My mom, on the other hand, struggled. Without her version of the story holding the family together, she seemed unsteady. Unsure how to maintain control when no one believed her anymore. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on my couch, staring at the soft glow of the lamp in the corner, thinking about everything that had happened. Karma is a word people use casually, like it is a cosmic hammer waiting to fall. But watching my sister's life unravel taught me something different. Karma is not loud. It is not theatrical. It does not arrive with fireworks or vengeance. Real karma is the slow withdrawal of trust, the quiet erosion of reputation. The moment people stop believing in the version of you that you fought so hard to project, it is the absence of faith, the absence of credibility, the absence of the spotlight you once used to hide the truth. It is not punishment. It is the world resetting itself. I leaned back on the couch, exhaling deeply, and let that understanding settle inside me. The fallout had begun, and all I had done was step out of the role that once kept me small. The rest was happening on its own, and once I understood that, a quiet space opened inside me, a space that had been crowded with guilt and obligation for years. In that stillness, one thought rose above all the others. My niece, the only person in this entire situation who had never lied to me, never manipulated me, never taken anything from me except the love I gave willingly. The fallout had swept through everyone except her, and I found myself wondering how much she even knew about what had happened. Children feel tension long before they understand it, and she had grown up surrounded by a mother who curated emotions the way other people curated wardrobes. I waited a few days before reaching out. I wanted the chaos to settle enough that my presence would not feel like taking sides. Finally, one morning, I sent a message asking if I could take my niece to the park after school. To my surprise, my sister responded almost immediately. Her tone was clipped, careful, but she agreed. Maybe she knew she did not have the right to use her daughter as leverage anymore, or maybe she was too exhausted to argue. Either way, I would take it. When I pulled up to her apartment complex, my niece came running out before my sister even opened the door fully. She threw her arms around my waist with the same unfiltered enthusiasm she always had. For a moment, my throat tightened. I hugged her back, breathing in the scent of crayons and shampoo, grounding myself in her simple joy. My sister appeared a second later, holding the door open only wide enough to show half her face. She looked worn out, her eyes swollen from crying, her hair pulled back in a hurried knot. For the first time in a long time, she did not look at me with expectation or entitlement. She looked at me with uncertainty. She asked what time I would bring her daughter back. Her voice was flat, almost wary. I told her a couple of hours. She nodded once, then closed the door without another word. I did not knock again. My niece and I drove to the small park near my apartment. She talked the entire way, bouncing from topic to topic in that delightful way children do. None of it had anything to do with money, weddings, or adult failures. She told me about her art project. She told me her best friend got a new puppy. She told me she hated the school cafeteria carrots. She told me she had learned how to tie her own shoes and demonstrated proudly in the passenger seat while the car was parked. She told me she wished we hung out more. That one cut through me, deep and simple and honest. We spent the afternoon walking the trail around the pond. She stopped to point out ducks, squirrels, and a group of teenagers practicing volleyball. She held my hand the entire time. When we sat on a bench to rest, she leaned her head on my shoulder with a little sigh, content in a way I had not seen in months. It struck me then how easy love was when it was not tangled in someone else's manipulation. How natural it felt to give without being drained. How different it was to hold space for someone who did not use that space for leverage. I realized the hardest part of stepping away from my sister's chaos was the fear that distancing myself from her meant distancing myself from her daughter too. But as I sat on that bench and listened to my niece talk about the dragon she was, drawing for class, something inside me settled. I could love this child without enabling the adult who created the mess around her. I could support her future without being used in the present. That thought stayed with me long after I dropped her back at the apartment and kissed her goodbye. My sister opened the door just enough for her daughter to slip inside, avoiding eye contact with me completely. I did not push it. I simply told my niece I loved her and walked away. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table staring at the soft glow of the overhead light. I opened my laptop, clicked into my bank account, and began researching a 529 college savings plan. I had heard about them for years and even recommended them to coworkers who were new parents. It seemed almost ironic that I had never opened one myself, not even for the child I had practically been helping raise financially. But this time, it felt different. It felt intentional. It felt like an act of love with boundaries built into it. I ran the numbers, read through the details, and set up an account in my name, with my niece listed as the beneficiary. The starting deposit was modest, but it was mine to give, and it was hers to receive someday. when she was old enough to choose her own life, not the one shaped for her by her mother's excuses. As I finished the setup, I felt something inside me loosen. A knot that had lived in my chest for years, finally unspooled. For the first time, I was creating something for her that my sister could not access, could not drain, could not manipulate. Something that would help her grow without feeding the cycle of entitlement that had consumed our family for so long. I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the weight of the decision settle. Loving a child while refusing to enable the adult attached to them is a strange balance. It feels like walking a line between compassion and self-respect. But as I settled into the quiet of my apartment, I realized I had finally found that balance. My niece deserved stability and a future. My sister did not deserve access to my resources or my guilt. Both truths could exist at the same time. The next day, my niece drew me a picture. My sister sent a simple message saying she had made it for me and wanted me to have it. The drawing showed two stick figures holding hands under a big sun. One figure was taller, the other smaller. Above it, in wobbly handwriting, she had written to us. That picture went onto my refrigerator door. For the first time in my adult life, I felt something close to relief. Not hope, not joy, just relief. A lightness that came from knowing I could care deeply without losing myself again. And as I stood in my kitchen looking at that drawing, I realized I was breathing easier. I was not waiting for the next crisis. I was not bracing for the next request. I was not rehearsing the next apology. I was simply standing in my own life, finally, and it felt steady beneath my feet. I went to bed that night with a quiet mind, knowing I had taken one step forward into a life where love was no longer a burden, and boundaries were no longer something to be afraid of. For the first time in a long time, morning came without a knot forming in my chest before I even opened my eyes. A few days passed before my dad reached out again. This time, he asked if he could come by after work. There was a steadiness in his voice that I had not heard in years. When he arrived, he stood just inside my doorway for a moment, looking at me the way a person might look at a photograph they had walked past 1,000 times, but only now noticed for the first time. He sat down at my kitchen table and rested both hands flat against the wood. He did not look away. He did not sigh. He did not soften the moment with small talk. He apologized, not the halfway apology some parents give, where they say they did their best or they meant well. He apologized for not seeing me clearly. He apologized for believing silence meant strength. He apologized for allowing patterns to go unchallenged because confronting them felt uncomfortable. He apologized for letting my sister treat me like a resource instead of a person. And then he said something that reached a part of me I did not know was still waiting. He said he had always seen me as the strong one, but now he understood that strength was not a gift I had been given. It was a role I had been pushed into, a role I accepted because no one offered to share the weight. He said he wished he had stepped in sooner. He said he wished he had asked more questions. He said he was learning now, not too late, but late enough to regret it. I listened quietly. I did not absolve him, and I did not punish him. I simply let the truth rest between us in a way that felt cleaner than anything we had shared in years. When he stood to leave, he hugged me again. A real hug this time, one that acknowledged not only what I had endured, but who I had become because of it. My mom reacted differently. She called occasionally, but not with the sharp authority she once held over every conversation. Something had shifted. She no longer told me what I needed to do. She no longer insisted I fix whatever my sister had broken. She no longer used guilt like a tool. Instead, she skirted around the edges of every topic, circling things without naming them. Her voice sounded smaller somehow, as if losing control of the story meant losing her footing in the family. She did not apologize. Not clearly. Not fully. But she stopped criticizing my choices. She stopped defending my sister automatically. She stopped assuming I would bend whenever the family bent toward dysfunction. Her silence no longer pushed me down. It simply left room for me to breathe. And my sister. She did not call. She did not message. She disappeared behind a wall of shame so quickly it was almost startling. I heard from others that she was struggling, but I did not chase updates. I did not rescue her from the consequences she had created. I did not soothe the fallout that finally reached her after years of outrunning. Accountability. I realized then that I had not been rejected all those years because I was weak. I had been rejected because I was too easy to use. The moment I stopped offering myself as the solution, the dynamic shifted. She wanted what I provided, not who I was. And when I stopped providing it, her connection to me vanished. There was an unexpected freedom in that clarity. As the weeks passed, I found myself settling into a new kind of quiet, not the heavy quiet of being pushed aside, not the resentful quiet of swallowing my needs. This was a quiet building from space I had never let myself claim. I started cooking more. I started sleeping deeper. I started sitting on my balcony in the evenings, letting the soft North Carolina breeze move through the jasmine vines that grew along the railing. The world around me had not changed, but I had, and that shift made everything feel steadier. One night, I sat on my living room floor with a cup of chamomile tea, the lamp casting a warm circle of light across the rug. Papers and receipts were gone. Screenshots were archived. The binder I built sat tucked neatly on a shelf, no longer needing my attention. My phone was quiet, except for occasional messages from my niece sending me photos. She drew or updates from school. Those messages were the only ones that mattered now. She remained untouched by the adult drama that swirled around her mother. She was a small reminder that love, when clean, does not demand self-sacrifice. I thought about the version of myself I had been for so many years, the girl who stepped in without being asked, the young woman who believed caretaking was the same thing as belonging, the older sister who saw responsibility as love. I thought about how many times I mistook silence for peace and compliance for kindness. And I looked at who I was becoming now. I was no longer the strong sister, at least not the version of strength they had shaped me into. I was no longer the fixer, no longer the cushion, no longer the one who absorbed the impact so everyone else could continue without discomfort. Strength now felt quieter, gentler, more grounded. It meant choosing myself without guilt. It meant building a life that was not built around saving someone else from their choices. It meant protecting the part of me that had been ignored for far too long. My dad began visiting more often. Not to apologize again, but simply to be present. We took short walks. We shared meals. We talked about ordinary things. It was a new chapter between us, one where I did not feel overshadowed by my sister's needs. My mom was cautious, but less combative. She asked how I was, sometimes awkwardly, as if learning a new language. I answered honestly, not shrinking or offering myself as a solution to anything. The family was rearranging itself in subtle ways. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough that space opened where suffocation once existed. One evening, after my dad left and the apartment fell into its familiar softness, I realized the existential rejection I had carried for years was never about my worth. It was about usefulness. As long as I made myself small enough to fit into the role they needed, they accepted me. The moment, and I refused to shrink again. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street below. Porch lights glowed from the neighboring buildings. A dog barked in the distance. A delivery truck rumbled down the road. Life moved on, and I stayed rooted on my own, finally. I sat back on the couch, pulled a blanket over my legs, and let the evening settle around me like a soft breath. I knew there would be more conversations ahead, more healing, more boundaries to reinforce. But none of it scared me, not anymore, because I had stepped out of the role that once defined me, and the world had not collapsed. If anything, it had expanded, and as I closed my eyes for the night, I felt the quietest truth rise inside me. I had not lost a family. I had simply stopped losing myself to keep one. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.